everybody. I'm here today with Markus Kliewer. His debut novel, We Used to Live Here, began life as a serialized short story on Reddit, where it won the Scariest Story of 2021 award on the No Sleep Forum. Film rights were snapped up by Netflix, and it was acquired by Simon & Schuster for publication even before it had been extended into a full-length novel. His second novel, The Caretaker, is out now from 1201 Books. Welcome, Markus.
Hi.
Okay, I know I kind of barely scratched the surface there, so can you fill in the blanks and kind of tell me what I missed?
That's pretty much everything. I got my first book, We Used to Live Here. Now my second one, Caretaker. I mean, that's as good as a summary as it gets, I think. I'm pretty bad at pitching myself, so yeah,
No worries. I'll do it for you. That's why we're here.
sounds good.
So, how did you first get into writing and why horror of all the genres that you could have picked?
I think my earliest writing was actually like stick figure comics or very simple stories with stick figure drawings next to them. And I probably have stuff dating back to like I don't know, whatever age kids pick up pencils and are able to write basic hand printing, so pretty young. And I've just been obsessed with storytelling and world building ever since. And I think too, growing up, I grew up in like a religious household, so like horror was like this kind of forbidden fruit thing. So it had this like extra allure to it. And a lot of my experience of horror early on was from like Christian horror authors, a guy named Frank Peretti and Ted Decker, who I think are actually quite good authors in their own. I mean, it's a niche genre, and I haven't read their stuff in a while, but I remember being quite absorbed by those books. And yeah, now here I am.
Awesome. And so, if you're into the stick figure drawings, does that mean we can expect a graphic novel from you at some point?
I would love to collaborate with an actual artist because I am certainly not one. Yeah, and it's now that I'm able to, have some like publisher backing behind me, it's definitely something I'm like would be very interested in the future. So
Well, when you're writing, what is your process like? What comes to you first? Is it the characters, the plot, the setting, something else?
it's different for every story. I think usually it comes around a title and kind of a concept. So uh we used to live here was always a family knocking at the door and then saying they used to live there and taking a look around kind of thing. And that kind of became the core concept. It evolved over different iterations, but that was always the hook. And coincidentally also happens to be the very, very opening scene. And it was the same thing with Caretaker, really, where somebody coming across a job and it's kind of sketchy, and then them going to this house and caretaking a house. So for both of those, I guess it was always the first scene that kind of became the seed for the rest of the story. And I think that's how I generally work. It's kind of I like working sequentially. I can't really jump around a lot timeline wise. I find it like brick by brick. I start with the foundation and then I kind of work my way from there. And that's how it's been for these two ones. But sometimes it's as simple as just like a weird character quirk, or sometimes it's just a line that I find interesting, and then that kind of becomes the hook into it. But generally, it's the idea and the log line. So, creepy family shows up, wants to take a look around a house they used to live in. Sketchy house sitting job with creepy rights to follow, or the world's going to end. I like once I have that, it's much easier for me to kind of build off of that.
So, are you more of a pantser than a plotter?
Um, I would say I'm a hybrid. I think one of the issues I've had in the past with outlining is I find it very low resolution. Like it's very broad in its details. And for me, so much of plot and character moments kind of spins off the most minute little moments. And I'm not good at coming up with that kind of stuff in an outlining phase. So what I do is a hybrid is I'll kind of write early scouting versions of the story in present tense, and it's almost more like a movie where it's kind of describing what's happening. Like, there's three knocks at the front door. Eve goes to answer the door. There's a family standing on the doorstep. They kind of look weird, and the dad asks if he can take a look around the house because he grew up there. And the reason that works for me so well is because I can really make it outlining when I'm not knowing the details of a scene. I can just be as very point form. But then when I get into a scene where I'm really feeling it, I can kind of zoom in and go as high resolution as I need to. And like maybe I'll start writing dialogue, maybe I'll start injecting metaphors in there. And then again, if I hit a wall where it's like, okay, I know Eve needs to have an argument with Charlie in this scene, and I know Eve needs to win the argument, but I don't know the details of that argument, then I'll just say Eve and Charlie have an argument about the family. Eve wins and the family stays. And that way it's like I still hit blocks, but it's much less common for me to hit a block because I can kind of do that zooming in and out, and then I go back and kind of flesh it out.
Mhm.
And I view it as a very destructive process. I think a very exploratory process, because with outlining, I tend to get, in the past, I would start doing color coding and I would start like making this very pretty outline. I've tried the cards on a pin board, but then once I put it up, I'm like, oh, I don't want to move it. I put so much work into this. So I think viewing it in this form as a destructive sandbox, so to speak. And another thing I do is whenever I'm cutting something, I don't actually delete it. I just cut it and then paste it into a document called deleted content, which I almost never go back to. But that helps with the destructive process, because it can be very hard to write something and then be like, crap, this isn't working. And then it becomes a sunk cost fallacy. But allowing myself to just throw it into that document, and 99% of the time I never go back to it. But there is that 1% where it's like, oh, you know what? I like that metaphor. I'm going to go back and dig it out. It just helps release that tension of being too precious about it.
I love that description. I do something similar. I never delete anything. I will save past versions. I have a little sidebar where I
Yeah,
put notes and anything just in case, because sometimes you go back and edit and you think that didn't work as well as I wanted it to. What was I thinking when I wrote this? And it just really helps.
totally.
Well, do you think that your experience writing on the Reddit forums like No Sleep informed your writing process at all, or the kinds of stories that you're drawn to?
Yeah, I think I kind of started on there back in 2014 on a different account. I don't even know if the stories are still public. I don't want people to see them either way, but and then I got back into it around COVID. And I think for me, what I did is I started a series and I posted every Tuesday at the same time. And I didn't know what the next part was going to be. I kind of just had, it was a rules story. So I had, a list of rules the character had to follow, and that helped provide some kind of structure. But other than that, it was just kind of like, I'm going to post this every Tuesday and then write the next part within that week. And
Cool.
I've looked back at that story a few times, and there's definitely rough patches in it, and it definitely can feel like, oh, this was made up as it went along. But at the same time, I'm like, man, like that was a really motivating process. I don't necessarily recommend it for everybody. But another thing that it taught me on Reddit, aside from just the fear of like putting something out there that you've wrote, which is like a big hindrance for a lot of people, myself included, for most of my life, was just kind of like, oh, even anonymously, I'm like, oh, I don't want to fail anonymously. But I think having that anonymous buffer, being able to post in kind of a safe forum, and once I got over that, it's an exposure therapy of just like, okay, this is something I wrote and I'm putting it out there, and that's just how it is. Some people are going to love it, some people are going to hate it, some people aren't going to care about it, and that's just a rite of passage.
Yeah.
But another element of that was basically, because it was in a serial thing and because I was doing it weekly, I really wanted to end each part on some kind of, I don't like saying the word cliffhanger, because I think like I've heard it said that like a cliffhanger is when you have the character at the end of the season open the door and you don't see what they see, and then they just gasp, and then it cuts to black. That's frustrating because you're like, I don't know. They could be gasping that their kids put strawberry stuff all over the wall. They could be gasping at that body. But like a good cliffhanger is the character walks into the room, opens the door, then you see what they've seen and their reaction to it, and then it cuts to black because it's like, okay, now so many things, it's like, oh, it's Lemaine, their partner is dead or something, like something that kind of you can build off of. And so I try doing that, even the smallest little thing. Um, and and that helped me with chapters because like I really like ending chapters on some kind of thing that makes people want to read one more.
Mm.
And then the other thing I learned was to always stop writing whenever I could in the middle of a scene where I felt the energy of the scene, which is kind of counterintuitive because generally you're told to like, oh, when you're feeling it and you're flowing, just don't,
Mhm.
ride that wave and don't let it go. And that's not bad advice. And I follow that sometimes. But for me, it was super motivating. If I ended on a scene where I'm like, I don't know where this is going, I don't know what the character is going to say, I don't know anything, then I kind of start the next day grinding my teeth, being like, okay, crap, like what do I do? Whereas if I end it in the middle of a scene that's like, okay, I know this is gonna be a cat and mouse chase sequence in the basement, which that's like my forte is writing that kind of stuff. Then the next day I kind of have that launching pad of momentum.
Isn't that hard to stop though? Because I know exactly what you're talking about. You're in the flow and you're like, nobody better interrupt me. It would be very hard for me to walk away.
What I do when it is hard is I will, at the very least, I will point form out. If I have like a really good
Mm.
idea in my head, I'll point form out where I want it to go until I hit a wall in the point form. So then at least I'm like, okay, I got that momentum and then I hit a wall. But normally just having the point form helps me remember and then kind of I can use that momentum. But yeah, it was difficult and it is counterintuitive for sure, but it definitely helped me.
Cool. I mean, I love anything counterintuitive. It makes things interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to talk more about We Used to Live Here. It still lives in my brain. I still think about it. I remember when that came out, you could not find a copy anywhere. It was sold out everywhere, which is so exciting and for very good reason. Can you talk a little bit about the experience of going from posting on Reddit to having a New York Times bestselling book that went into multiple printings? I mean, I can imagine that was a very surreal experience.
Yeah, it's still like it still doesn't feel fully real to me. And I'm really glad. I've said this a few times, but I'm really glad it happened to me in my like late 20s, early 30s, because I think if it happened to me earlier, I would have either become like a real dick or I would have gone insane because it's
Mm.
so much. Like I see these incredibly talented young filmmakers, like the guy who did Backrooms
Mhm.
or Curry Barker who did Obsession.
Yeah.
They seem both very like well-adjusted guys, so like it seems like they're not letting it crumble their psyches. Like they're not they're grateful for it, but they're not kind of letting it blow up their egos. But they're also not becoming imposter syndromed. And I think
Mhm.
I don't know if I was that mature in my early 20s or even my mid 20s to handle that kind of that whiplash of I guess success for lack of a better word. And it's just been completely surreal. And even when We Used to Live Here launched, it was a relatively modest launch because it was a debut author and it did well, but it was kind of like I think a few months into it when it just really kicked off in the TikTok bookstagram algorithms, and it just really hasn't slowed down ever since. So I think for me it's kind of like I treat it, I'm super grateful and I feel super fortunate, and then I'm also not making it bigger than it. Like I'm still gonna die. I'm still, I still have to clean up my cat litter every day. So like that kind of stuff, just not getting an ego, and also not kind of falling into imposter syndrome either, and just be like, this is cool, and I'm really grateful that it's happening. And if this was the farthest it ever went, I would just be so grateful that it even went this far to begin with, because I would never imagined this in even my craziest dreams. So
I mean, it's also really interesting how something like Book Talk or Bookstagram, even months after a book's release, can just shoot it into the stratosphere. And there's no
yeah,
way to plan for that or game that or really do anything. You just have to hope.
totally. Yeah.
Well, the film rights were also snapped up pretty quick. Is there any news about that?
I mean, Hollywood's gonna Hollywood, so I can't
Mhm.
I can't say too much. But certainly the success of both books is kind of definitely kicking things into gear behind the scene. And then obviously the success of both Backrooms and Obsession this year. Now Hollywood is kind of frothing at the mouth for that kind of stuff. So I'm certain it will definitely help move some of those projects along. But I'm pretty hands off. I keep pretty distance from Hollywood because I'm a very private, introverted person, and Hollywood is intense and scary, and yeah.
Yeah,
But it's
I get
cool.
that.
It's cool.
Well, I can't wait to see the movie when it comes out. And I also want to talk about your newest work, The Caretaker, already making waves. And even though I'm about to read it on my Kindle, I also want to get a copy from you at ShiverCon in just a few months.
Absolutely.
So, can you talk about how the release of that second novel compared to We Used to Live Here? Were you nervous about releasing another book after that huge success?
I think I think I was until I heard it was the showrunner of a show called Severance, and he kind of said something that I said earlier that I've kind of just taken on as my own mantra, and he worked in like a door factory and wrote Severance pilot. I don't know the exact details of his origin story, but basically wrote it, I believe, while he was working in a door factory, and then Ben Stiller read it, and then it kind of just exploded from there. And now it's this amazingly popular, really, really good Emmy award-winning Apple TV show. And it was him in a podcast who was saying like, "Hey, if this is the furthest, if the next season doesn't happen, and this is like the furthest my career has ever gone," he's like, "I was working in a door factory, so this is a pretty amazing experience." And I think just seeing somebody else who's had like a somewhat similar trajectory of suddenly getting swept up into craziness and just having such a grounded perspective on it kind of calmed down that element of like, oh man, my next book needs to be bigger and it needs to be better. And like, obviously, there is always some of that in the back of your mind. But I'm just writing books that I care about with stories that I care about. And however many people connect with that is fantastic. So
Mhm.
obviously I'm happy that it is a success and everything, but I think if it wasn't as big as We Used to Live Here, I would be totally okay with that as well.
Gotcha. Well, I read an article you wrote recently for Book Riot about how writing horror helped you find an OCD diagnosis. Super interesting. Do you feel comfortable talking more about that? Because
Yeah.
it was fascinating.
Yeah, so it was actually a story I was writing on Reddit called "The Man in My Basement Takes One Step Closer Every Week." It was literally the one that I was telling you about earlier, where I was writing it week to week. And I can't find the DM anymore because I think Reddit just deleted a bunch of DMs, but somebody had DM'd me saying, like, hey, it was something along the lines of like, hey, this character's experience is really similar to my experience with OCD. Do you have OCD and this kind of stuff? And I hadn't, like, OCD hadn't even like crossed my mind with it. I mean, it did tangentially because of course I knew there's like a structured OCD and there's like compulsions that people follow, but it was just very distant and it wasn't really in my mind at all when I was writing this story. Um and that comment kind of triggered me to start doing more research into it over the months and years. And then I was like, oh wow, there's a lot I relate to with OCD, because I think so much representation of it is it's very focused on certain subsets, like, obsession with cleanliness and symmetry, which are very real forms of OCD and deserve to be represented. But I think there's definitely, myself included, I just for my whole life had a very narrow idea of what OCD even was. And then doing more research and reading, oh, it can be entirely inside of your head. It can be physical compulsions. It can be mental like there's just, it's such a wildly varying disorder.
Mm.
And yet ended up talking to like actual counselors and psychologists, and then ended up getting like a diagnosis. So it was kind of just like a really big mind twist of a situation, because I just started looking back at my own life and my own experience with growing up religious and harm OCD and all these kind of things that I honestly just thought was like anxiety or just stuff that other people thought. Like, I think when you grow up in your head, you just kind of assume like, oh, doesn't everybody have that. Like, and yeah, if it wasn't for horror, I may not have ever even come to that realization.
Very
So,
cool.
and it's been great kind of giving the monster a name, because treating OCD as just typical anxiety doesn't it can actually generally make it worse, because so much of it is about seeking reassurance and relief. And generally speaking, that's kind of how you would treat anxiety, is like, okay, everything's fine, but that come becomes part of the cycle of OCD, of being like, oh, like when I was a kid growing up, it was very religious. So I'd be like, oh my goodness, I think I said a swear word in private once, and now I'm going to go to hell. And so I would have to tell every adult that I said this swear word. And they'd be like, okay, you're fine. And then I would get this huge rush of like dopamine and relief and be like, oh my God, okay, I'm not going to hell. And then I would be like, oh, but what about the time? And it was just like a constant thing for most of my childhood, of just like constantly thinking back through everything I'd done, and then finding someone to basically confess it to, even though I wasn't even Catholic, like I didn't have the confession right. I was Protestant. And then learning how similar it is to addiction in a lot of ways, because you get such a head rush, or at least I did in my experience with it, of like just this huge dopamine and relief. And then immediately that goes away, and you're kind of seeking another relief, and learning about that cycle and kind of learning ways to not feed it has been incredibly helpful.
That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah.
I mean, the power of horror, right? Power of
Yeah,
horror.
totally.
Well, do you have any words that you'd use to describe your horror or categorize it? Anything that unifies all of your work?
I would say uncanny, and I guess cosmic undertones. But I'm definitely these two books, We Used to Live Here and Caretaker, share similarities in that sense of the type of horror they are. But in the future, I love like Sam Raimi. I love over the top horror. I love thrillers. I love mystery. So like I'm really right now it's uncanny cosmic horror, but I may explore more traditional avenues, and I might even have stories that make sense at the end, just a few of those that where they do explain everything, because I think that can be really fun as
Mhm.
well. It's generally not as scary for me, but it can be really satisfying to have like Get Out is a fantastic example of that, where once you realize what's going on, your mind kind of goes back through the entire story and you want to watch it again. Um, and it doesn't really take away from the scares either. It arguably makes it even scarier, which is a hard thing to pull off. So I would love to try to do that in future stories. But I also just love this cosmic, unknown, uncanny kind of terror as well. So
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, is there anything that you wish we saw more of in the horror book world?
I think I'm much more well read than I have been, because like a lot of my 20s and even my early 30s, my attention span was so shot that like I struggled to read for a while. So I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff out there like this, and I'm just not familiar with it. But I really like stuff that does that does kind of have this slightly off. I think something is slightly off, and you don't quite know what is wrong, and it's kind of a building sense of dread. So I think like Ian Reid, who's often categorized as thriller, but he wrote a book called I'm Thinking of Ending Things, and a book called Foe. Um, where I just really love that kind of living nightmare feeling of being in these uncomfortable social situations and not sure if you're reading the other person correctly. I find very relatable and really freaky. And I definitely, and We Used to Live Here, especially, there's a lot of attempts at that kind of uncanny relational horror. Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to see more of that too. I think that is an underexplored subgenre of horror for sure. Well, this might be either the hardest question or the easiest question I'm going to ask you. What is your favorite horror book and why?
Oof. The answer changes day by day. I think recency bias, maybe, but I really loved Nat Cassidy's When the Wolf Comes Home. uh, I listened to it on audio a few months ago and was just completely absorbed into it. And it was fun. It was scary. It was emotional. It kind of just had everything I wanted. And um, so that's the one on the tip of my tongue. But there's always other answers. So that one is huge, and it's recency bias. And then I would say like older, more like long term, I would say I don't know. I always blank, but yeah, I'll think of 50 things after the interview ends. But yeah.
Hey, you gave me one, and that one is a great one.
Mhm.
Oh, so you've got the caretaker out, but what is next on the horizon for you?
So I have an audio trilogy of short stories coming out in September, on September 22nd. And that's going to be on like Libro, Audible, Spotify, wherever you can get audiobooks. And that one's really fun. We have Sosie Bacon, who starred in the first Smile movie. She's reading the lead story, and then we have two other fantastic actors for the other stories. And there's like a bit of sound design elements mixed in as well. And yeah, two of the stories take place in the Caretaker We Used to Live Here universe, and then the title story, called Please Remain Seated, is completely in its own universe, which might become its own universe where I kind of can do more over the top, less grounded types of horror without. I like being very grounded in the We Used to Live Here universe, but I also like more fun, over the top type of horror as well. And so I think Please Remain kind of might be the launch of that secondary world where I can explore more Sam Raimi kind of vibes of horror for sure.
Very cool. Well, last question for you. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received about writing?
Uh, I would say embrace failure and embrace rejection. That doesn't mean you have to enjoy it, but at least accept that it's part of the process. I think there's this kind of myth out there that people are just born good at things and they just like write stories and it's just gold immediately. But it's like I struggled writing for most of my life. I was the type of writer that it would take me like 30 minutes to write a single paragraph kind of thing. And it wasn't until I like started focusing on the craft and then also just embracing that, hey, people will not like what you write. It doesn't matter if you write a Pulitzer Prize winning novel like Angel Down, which I'm reading right now, and it's
Me
fantastic.
too. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you are still gonna have. I saw comments on a YouTube video being like, I could not stand this book. It's so irritating and both. And
So much.
that's it. Doesn't matter. You could be a Pulitzer Prize winning incredible novel, and you're always gonna have people that hate it, and that is part of that is just the price of writing and exploring any kind of art. And so I guess tying to that, it would be from Stephen King's On Writing, where when he was younger, he would post all of his rejection letters up on the wall when he submitted short stories to magazines. And because to him, it was like, this is a sign that I'm working towards what I want to work towards. And nobody expects to pick up a guitar and be able to play an amazing solo right away. And I feel like it's the same thing with any craft or anything you want to get better at. So
For sure. Very good advice. Well, can you just tell everybody where they can find you and keep up with you and your work?
yeah, you can follow me on Instagram. It's just Markus_Kliewer. And I think TikTok is the same one. I'm starting to post more on there. And yeah, check out my subreddit r/Old House Archive for more hidden documents and short stories and fun stuff like that. So yeah,
Well, thank you so much.
thank you.